Cultivating collective intelligence. You may have been asked to participate in something called a brainstorm at some stage, or having been in a brainstorming session. This is actually a much abused technique which is supposed to come up with the best from a group of people. So the idea is that somehow by getting everybody together and go through a process like this, they'll come up with something where the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. They're trying to develop some sort of collective imagination. The problem with brainstorming is that it's usually done badly. And actually, studies have, over the years, so this is a technique that comes from the 1950s, studies of its use over the years have demonstrated that most brainstorming activities produce fewer new ideas than they would have come up with if all the individuals had gone off and done it on their own. So brainstorming, if you're going to do it, it has to be done right. And let's use it as a little model because it actually relates to my earlier point about open and closed mode. So the idea in brainstorming is that everybody in the group is supposed to come up with ideas to solve a problem and that no one is allowed to criticize. So it sounds very similar to Disney's model where this is the dreamer room, right? Remember the dreamer room was separate from the critics room, and you keep these processes separate. So the principle is great, it works. The problem is that if you bring everybody in fresh and you give them this problem and they're in a room together and you ask them to come up with ideas and you say, look, it doesn't matter, no one's going to criticize you, you can say whatever you want, it doesn't actually work like that because people are still afraid of what people think of them. They're still afraid of being criticized in people's heads, even if they're not allowed to express it. So they are repressing their imagination without realizing it. So that's why if brainstorming is done like that with no preparation, they often find that they get fewer ideas than if people had gone off on their own. So the solution is very easy. You give people a problem first, you send them off on their own and ask them to write down all their ideas for a solution. Bring those written ideas back, anonymize them so that nobody knows who gave the ideas. They're all shared collectively and you get many more ideas and then you can go on to the next stage. So it's simply a matter of avoiding a situation where people are afraid of other people's opinion because that closes down the imaginative kind of inner child. So this principle is very important to understand if you want to develop an effective collective process which is going to generate something greater than the individuals could do on their own. A wonderful example of this process developed with incredible effectiveness and success is Pixar Animation Studios. I've just been reading this incredible book, Creativity Inc. by Ed Catmull, who is the president of both Pixar and Disney Animation nowadays. So he was so good, he and his creative partner, John Lasseter, they were so good that Disney, realizing that they were not producing any good animation films, and Pixar had just produced something like 11 hit animation movies in a row, which is supposed to be impossible. Disney, of course, took the option that many large companies do and bought Pixar. And not only bought Pixar and kind of kept it separate, they didn't want to interfere because what was happening was working, but part of the deal was that John Lasseter and Ed Catmull would become the CEOs, they would run Disney Animation Studios. And that has revived their whole studio as well, which was really flagging. So Ed Catmull is one of the great managers of creative teams in the world. And he wrote this fabulous book. And there are many insights there, which I don't have time to tell you now. Anyway, I'm just borrowing them from him. But many of them tie in with what I teach and my methods. And it's no accident because Ed Catmull happens to be a Tibetan Buddhist meditator. And he really knows what he's talking about when it comes to creativity. So on an internal level as well as an organizational level. So In the book Creativity Inc., Ed Catmull tells about the early stages of Pixar Studios. Then he goes on to how they produced their first full-length feature movie that's completely animated. It was the first such movie in history. And it was called Toy Story. That's right. And of course, it was a beautiful film. Great success. I loved it. Then, big success, so they had to follow that with another success. And this is when it gets kind of hard. Not that it was easy to do the first one, but it's kind of harder when you've already done something really great and people expect you to do the same or better. And you keep raising the bar on yourself. So now they had to produce 2 movies at the same time, A Bug's Life, and they were working on Toy Story 2. And they ran into some major problems with Toy Story 2, and it was very, very stressful. They managed to bring it out, and it was also a wonderful film, but it was not easy. And partly as a result of that, they developed an internal kind of cultural tradition. They call it their brain trust. It's a team who give feedback on the films in development. Now, in regular studios, what happens is the director will go through some work, and every couple of months, or maybe 3 months or longer, they will send their version in progress to different people, and they give them written notes as feedback. But those people are usually not actual filmmakers, they're producers, and they're really not coming from the perspective of a director, of a creative individual. So there are problems with that, and there's usually a tension between the production side and the director side, and it's a classic sort of struggle between being more creative and taking risks, and making sure we're going to make money, and it's not always harmonious. So what Ed Catmull wanted to do was do something different. So he had a team who give feedback called the Brain Trust, and they're all filmmakers. But he did a couple of critical things here. Firstly, he gave the Brain Trust no authority. They cannot tell the director what to do. They'll give criticisms. And it's very important at this stage that they be completely candid. So these people are friends. They're working together. They don't want to hurt one another's feelings, but they've got to be prepared to be honest in their criticism. And so Catmull talks a lot about setting up the kind of environment where it's kind of safe. People can feel that that the criticism is not of them. The criticism is of the work in progress. And the first thing that everyone has to really acknowledge is that the first version of any film is terrible. And he said it's like that. He said even some of these amazing films, like think of Up or Toy Story 3 from Pixar. He said their first versions were awful. The cliched, trite, over-sentimental. He said they were dreadful. But through this refining process, bringing their best minds together, they were able to hone it and give the director really honest feedback and see, the problems and what's the reason for the problem, which is usually the hardest part. And then the solution is not suggested by the Brain Trust. That's the director and the director's team to deal with. They've got to figure out how to solve the problem, but they need to know what the problems are and what the causes of the problems are. And for that, they need an objective mind, if you like. So this is a very sophisticated, cutting-edge group process that's been developed over years with this incredibly successful creative endeavor. I think there are about 600 employees at Pixar, and they're working on multiple films, usually 2 or 3 at a time, I believe. And large amounts of money involved in this, high risk, but they've been consistently successful. And this brain trust collective process is one of the keys to that.